Off to Homestead we go. We're back on the Money Stop. This is your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. This, of course, is the Money Stop presented by Kickin the Tires and GridRival. And we have one player in the championship for Cole. His name, to no surprise, in an even-numbered year, it's Joey Logano, the winner at Vegas, one of the guys we pinpointed along with a couple others in that top five. But once again, I feel like we've been touting his praise all playoffs long. Didn't really feel like the entire regular season there was much to write home about with this 22 team, but we said it time and time again. It proves to be true. This is a driver and a team and a crew chief that knows how to flip the switch this time of year, and they've done it again.
Yeah, and you know what? That is the strength of not just Joey Logano, but this entire 22 team. It's a complete team effort. It's Team Penske and their excellence on full display once again. And this is just a testament to how that team is run, how that organization is run as a whole. Logano was literally one DQ of Alex Bowman away from not making this round of 8. But sure enough, you give him a chance, and he is going to pounce. He sure did once again at Las Vegas, one of our sleepers for the win. Just incredible to see. And I know there's a lot of naysayers and number crunchers out there that think this is not a deserving driver or team to make that championship for, but we saw this exact same scenario back in 2022 when he went on to win the championship. Didn't have a flashy regular season, had a speedy postseason in the first couple of rounds with not a whole lot of flash in there as well, but once the round of 8 opened up at Las Vegas, he got the win and went on to win the championship. And will that be the case again? That remains to be seen once we get our 3 other drivers in this championship 4 round. But we saw how important getting that head start on prep for Phoenix was for that 22 team back in the year 2022. And speaking with Logano earlier this week, he had those exact same sentiments. So definitely could be a good omen for this team going forward. Now, shifting gears to why you're here. The gambling goodness, the analysis from last weekend going into Las Vegas. Listen, we had an unsustainable top 10 success rate over the 2 weeks prior to that. We had 7 of the top 10 drivers highlighted on our show. Different story for Las Vegas, when that's typical, taking into account the fact that there was a fuel mileage finish, evidenced by finishers in the top 10 like John Hunter Nemechek, Daniel Suarez in third. But we still had a successful weekend because while we did only highlight 4 of the top 10 drivers, 3 of those were inside the top 5, including the top 2 finishers in Joey Logano and Christopher Bell, and your winner pick, Stephen, and William Byron, who finished 4th. Outside of that, we had Ross Chastain finishing 7th. But on top of that, while we didn't have a very good success rate in terms of top 10 finishers, we did have a good success rate in terms of our prop predictions because we nailed 6 of those last week for Las Vegas. The ones that did not hit obviously surrounded drivers like Tyler Reddick, Chase Elliott, or Ryan Blaney, who were caught up in an incident in the middle of this race. But another great weekend of analysis from us here at the Money Stop. And I gotta say, I am really looking forward to Homestead for numerous reasons. The obvious reasons being that this is one of the best tracks on the circuit in the next gen, up there with Kansas for the most competitive, the most thrilling. I really do believe it is a borderline perfect track with this current car. But I also want to say something on a more personal level. Felt really confident, we always do, going into these weekends for predictions and analysis, but last weekend, I did not feel as great as I did going into the Roval or Kansas the weeks prior. This weekend, though, making this outline for Homestead, feeling awesome for the show we have lined up here. We have 12 drivers that are sure to put some money into your pocket, whether you're doing some prop predictions for GridRival, entering daily fantasy contests, or making prop bets per BetMGM and those other betting apps. Going to be a really, really fun one this weekend at Miami.
Absolutely. And you mentioned we had 4 of the top 10 drivers, even in spite of the fact that we weren't putting that, 100% guaranteed stamp of approval on the Vegas episode. But this is just such a fun round of 8 slate where you've got Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville, 3 of mine and our favorite tracks. And then finally, you get to go to Phoenix. But you only got 3 races left to put some money in your pocket and maximize on the opportunity. So as we turn the page to Homestead here, let's take a look at the odds per BetMGM pre-qualifying. As we record this just prior to qualifying, Kyle Larson is the overwhelming favorite at plus 325. Christopher Bell is plus 600. Tyler Reddick is plus 650. William Byron is plus 700, and Denny Hamlin is plus 1,000. So you've got 5 drivers that are all vying for a spot in the championship 4. And, we were pretty upfront earlier in the playoffs, Cole, about the fact that there was a pretty good chance that some sleepers were going to win these races, some of our value picks, some spoilers. This is not one of those rounds. The round of 8, traditionally, you're going to see these races be won by the cream of the crop, the guys that are going to be in the championship 4. So as we get into our favorites category here and give our 4 favorites to each in this tier regarding who has the best shot to win this race, I will say I'd be surprised if it's not one of these 4 drivers.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, for this week especially, you're looking at the top 4 shortest odds for the win as the favorites for the win in Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, Tyler Reddick, and William Byron. And I'm going to go with the not-so-obvious answer here. Obviously, Kyle Larson's the favorite for reasons that you're going to get to during your analysis, but I'm going to go with Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick is, again, plus 650 for the race win, and also want to preface by saying, for GridRival's daily fantasy purposes, we aren't able to enter contests living in Arizona, myself, Stephen being located in New York, and they recently made some changes to the app where we cannot get into the contest because we are not able to verify location. So I cannot provide the values for daily fantasy, but if you are in a state where it is legalized, you can definitely get the numbers there. So I just want to lead off by saying that. But shifting gears now to Tyler Reddick. He is coming off a worst-case scenario at Las Vegas. He got caught up in a wreck involving Martin Truex Jr., Chase Elliott, even Ryan Blaney was involved. And for that, he is now minus 30 below the cutoff going into Homestead. But are we setting up for another big moment from this 23-11 racing team? I think it's definitely setting up for that because we're going into one of, if not his best tracks on the circuit in Homestead, one of those tracks that caters to these dirt racers like Kyle Larson, like Christopher Bell, like Tyler Reddick. You can rip that high line, it's high speeds, and in my opinion, it's a very similar track to Darlington from a less technical sense. There's a lot less, volatility associated with these drivers in comparing Darlington to Homestead, and for that, you see more consistent results, more successful results in that area from these drivers. But speaking on Tyler Reddick specifically and his Homestead resume, he has finished top 3 in 3 of 4 Cup starts at this track, including a best finish of runner-up back in 2021. He finished 3rd there last year, and he's also a 2-time Xfinity Series winner at this track. So I think, Kyle Larson's going to be the obvious answer and the heavy favorite for this win, but I would be very surprised if it's not these two duking it out for this win and just dominating the entire race start to finish. So I love Reddick, I love Larson, but my other favorite for this win is going to be Christopher Bell from a less stat-heavy sense. He's plus 600 for the race win. That is the second shortest odds for the win to Kyle Larson, and he stays screaming hot, both literally and figuratively, following a runner-up finish at Las Vegas. And I say this because, he crossed the finish line. He was literally screaming in the car with rage because he couldn't get the job done once again. He came so close to winning both stages, led the most laps, and he just fell short. But now that this marks back-to-back runner-up finishes for Christopher Bell, he's finished top 7 in his last 5 races and 8 times over his last 9 starts in that same statistical area. So top 7 in 8 of his last 9 starts, 5 straight weeks. That is a recipe for success, and I think that is priming him to potentially go back-to-back at Homestead because he won the last race there. However, if you look at this race as a whole, he was not very dominant. He only had 2 stage points. He only led 26 laps on the day, and he had an average running position of 11th. So just outside the top 10 in that area, that's still his best average running spot through his 4 Cup starts at Homestead. But you look at his resume as a whole there, he finished 11th back in 2022. He has one more top 10, which was an 8th place finish in his first start at Homestead. So with those numbers in mind, I think there are better options statistically for the win, but there is no hotter driver in the sport right now than Christopher Bell. And for that reason, I think he's going to be a contender for this win, but I think he's more of a top 5 play at best when considering guys like Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. And it could very well be a trap race in that sense. I'm not saying he's going to finish outside the top 10, but I think he's going to be more of a top 5 play as opposed to a race-winning play the last couple weeks.
I feel like it's not possible to mention Christopher Bell without also mentioning William Byron, because you mentioned that Seabell is the hottest driver in the sport. And you can mention William Byron in that same vein, because they've both been neck and neck. It's like anything you can do, I can do better. William Byron is plus 700 for the race win. He is a favorite again this week. When he finished fourth last week at Vegas, that was his fourth straight week of finishing fourth or better. So while, as you mentioned, there was a doomsday scenario for a few of the playoff drivers, Blaney, Reddick, and Chase Elliott, William Byron capitalized by finishing fourth for the fourth straight week, fourth or better, that is. Finished as the winner at Homestead in 2021. He has had top tens in half of his 6 starts here since the Next Gen era, and included a fourth place finish in this race a year ago, and he's led 25 laps or more in each of his last 3 starts. So you're looking at a guy in William Byron that is basically just as hot as Christopher Bell. I think if William Byron's been finishing fourth, Seabell's been finishing second or third. So they've very much so been the class of the field these last several weeks of the playoffs. I don't expect that to change, especially when you consider how successful the 24 team has been on the mile-and-a-half and intermediate tracks this year, and even going back to last year. Everything played into their favor in this round a year ago, and I expect that to be the same case this week as well. You're looking at 2 of the hottest drivers in the garage in Seabell and William Byron. But, as you mentioned too, you alluded before, the fact that I'm going to touch on the heavy favorite to win this race, and that's Kyle Larson, who's plus 325. Finished 11th at Vegas, and prior to that race, we talked a lot about his success on the mile-and-a-half tracks every single week. He has the most laps led with over 1,200, 4 wins, 4 runner-ups, and that includes at Homestead, where he won the first next-gen race at Miami. He did not finish the race last year, but that was after he led over 95 laps. He has the most laps led at Homestead at 625, and he's got top 5s in 5 out of his 10 starts at Homestead. So for William Byron and Kyle Larson, the 2 Hendrick teammates, they have separated themselves as the 2 Hendrick drivers to beat, 2 of the drivers to beat in the field. I think you can say that any race, any track, any week, but especially this week for Kyle Larson. And coming off a little bit of a down performance at Vegas, I think a lot of people, including us, expected him to, start up front, run up front, and finish up front, whereas he just finished outside the top 10. So I feel really strongly about those top 4 drivers there. You've got 3 in Larson, Byron, Bell that are above the cut line pretty comfortably, and then Joey Logano, of course. But then if you look at the other 4 drivers beyond the bubble, I would say between Denny, Reddick, Blaney, Chase Elliott, I would venture to say I'm the most confident in Tyler Reddick, considering the reasons you mentioned. But that is the reason those 4 are our favorites. What do we got on sleepers this week, Cole?
Well, once upon a time, Homestead served as the championship race in the Cup Series, and for that reason, we have a champion-heavy sleepers category here. I'm going to start things off with 2 guys below the points cutoff in this current playoff hunt, beginning with Chase Elliott at plus 1,500 for the race win. It is officially time for the former champ to step up. He mentioned previously driving under pressure. Well, he is going to have a whole load of that over the next couple weeks, seeing as he is the last ranked driver in the standings right now, 53 points out of a spot in the championship 4, but there is reason for optimism. On top of the fact that he's been one of the most consistent drivers this season, he has had success at Homestead. His career best finish came back in 2020, his championship winning season where he finished second. Last year, he did finish 15th, which tied his worst finish in 8 Cup starts at this 1.5-mile track. But what that tells me is that he has a very high floor at Homestead, and that is evidenced by his 10.4 average finish. So with that in mind, much like somebody like a Christopher Bell or a William Byron, but on a lesser scale, I'm shooting for the top 5 props and heavy DFS consideration for Chase Elliott. And for this reason, I think that this is not a must-win for him. I think that Chase Elliott is smart enough to know, and he has the experience to know, that this is a race where, yes, he very well could win, but there's going to be other drivers that are going to be, heavier factors, like your Kyle Larsons, like your Tyler Reddicks. So I think, I don't want to say it's a matter of knowing your place, but looking ahead. He's done this before. He's won at Martinsville, and he's made it to the championship 4 and won the championship back in 2020. And I think you look at this upcoming slate, you don't need to get the win out of the way right now and kind of, burn your chances of going all out and having something happen to you where you get a bad finish. He has to stage race. He has to get a quality finish, a top 5 finish most likely. But then looking ahead to Martinsville, he finished 3rd there in the spring. He got the win there back in 2020. So he knows it's not out of the question to point your way into this championship 4. It's just a matter of racing aggressively smart, and I think he's going to do just that. This is a track where a lot of things can happen. It's a lot of uncertainty with the high speeds and that close racing. So as long as he can play conservatively but aggressively as well, it's going to be a good day for Chase Elliott, and I expect him to have a top 5 finish or very close to a top 5 finish at that. And then I'm going to go down the list here to Ryan Blaney, our reigning champion, who is plus 1,000 for the race win. He had a very tough break at Las Vegas. He actually was not directly involved in that wreck between Truex, Reddick, and Elliott, but he was trying to scoot by, and he tagged the wall, and he bent a right rear toe link. And for that, he had a really bad finish. He is now 47 points below the cutoff as the 7th-ranked driver, right above his buddy Chase Elliott. And in a similar sense to Chase Elliott, he has seen success here. He finished 2nd last year at Homestead with the 2nd most laps led with over 50. He had a top 3 finish in both stages, and he only has 2 top 5s and 9 starts, but both have come over his last 4 starts at Homestead. So he has seen recency in the form of success at Homestead. The 2nd place finish last year speaks volumes to me. It's definitely what propelled him to going to win his championship last year. And I think in a very similar vein to Chase Elliott, he's a former champion. He knows how to get it done. He knows how to play it smartly but conservatively. And I expect a lot of the same notions, like he's not as far back in the standings points-wise as Chase Elliott, so he's very much going to be someone searching for a top 5 day with a lot of stage points as well. And again, he won the race last year at Martinsville to punch his ticket into the championship 4. So for those reasons, I think it's a very similar driver to Chase Elliott. Maybe from a broader scope, he hasn't seen as much success, but in the form of recency, which is I think what we're looking at here in terms of this upcoming race. He is a very good play for a top 5 finish and someone who's worthy of DFS consideration as well.
Listen, we've named 6 playoff drivers now. That's obviously not playing it very bold. The only 2 we haven't mentioned are last week's winner, Joey Logano, and Denny Hamlin. So let me give you a couple names that are outside of that spectrum, and here's why. I'll start with Martin Truex Jr., a guy that is in the twilight of his career. Only a few more races for him to get that final win in the Cup Series. A guy that, before the season, you probably expected to be running for a championship at this point, but we've documented his inconsistencies all year long. And when you look at the next 3 races between here, Martinsville, and Phoenix, it's 3 pretty good tracks for him. But this is a one that maybe presents the best shot at him getting that final win, even in spite of Martinsville being next week, just because of the nature of the round of 8 cutoff. But Martin Truex Jr. finally had a complete race put together last week. 6th place at Vegas, so you can finally start to trust him a little bit. He's had the speed, he just hasn't had the finishes until now. You look at Martin Truex Jr.'s career as it winds down. He does have the win at Homestead, and it was when he was crowned champion back in 2017. Last year, started on the pole here, ended up with an engine issue, so he couldn't finish the race, obviously. The year prior, 2022, he finished 6th. He's had laps led in 6 of the last 7 starts he's made at Homestead with a 10.7 average finish, and he has had 12 top 10s overall out of 19 career starts at Homestead. So for Martin Truex Jr., we've been saying it all year. We want to see a good, strong result, consistent result before we lean into a little bit of trust with him. I think we've seen it now. If you're looking for any driver outside of those playoff 8 or playoff 6 that we mentioned at least, I think Martin Truex Jr.'s got to be at the top of the list, and Vegas certainly thinks so too with the plus 1,400 price point, which is right between Ryan Blaney and Chase Elliott. Another guy that we have seen have speed all year long, won his way into the playoffs, and he's been just so strong these last couple of years, is Brad Keselowski, another former champion. He is plus 2,000 for the race win. That stands tied with Ty Gibbs and just below Chase Elliott and Ross Chastain, to give you an idea of where BK sits in terms of the booksmakers. But for Brad, he had signs of life at Vegas last week before the DNF, and he was caught up in the incident as well. But similarly to Truex, there's some cautious optimism here that you can maybe start to trust after seeing the speed, not necessarily the result last week. But look at his next-gen debut at Homestead. He finished 5th. And last year, you forget, he had a really strong race at Homestead because Brad may have finished 28th, but remember, he led laps and had top fives in both stages before being caught up in a late race crash and obviously didn't get the finish he deserved to. But since the next-gen era at Homestead, best finish of third, which has happened twice. He's had 7 top 10s at Homestead, over 16 starts where he's posted a 14.5 average finish. So we know the speed's in there for BK. We know it's in there for RFK. And we know he's got it done at Homestead before. I like the two of these drivers, Martin Truex Jr. and Brad Keselowski, as potential spoilers for the round of 8. I was on the record. I think that it's going to be one of those top 8 drivers in the standings that wins this race. However, if it's not going to be one of those 8, I think it'll be one of these 2.
I would definitely tend to agree with that statement for sure. I think seeing the race that Truex put together last week at Vegas was a very, very encouraging thing to see. I think the speed's been there for Brad as well in the playoffs, but the results just have not been there. But I think, going through this episode already, we've mentioned 6 of the 8 playoff drivers. The sleepers category was made up of completely champions. And I think the hallmark, or I guess the true determining factor of a good episode for the Money Stop is going to be a rock-solid value pick section. And with that in mind, we have one here that I think is going to set a lot of bettors out there up for success, whether you're making those prop bets for top 10 finishes or entering daily contests for daily fantasy per GridRival. We have 4 drivers lined up here that should give you a major boost in whatever you're looking for this weekend. I'm going to kick things off here with the only 2 drivers with top 10s in both next-gen starts at Homestead. And it's crazy to even say that when you consider the fact that we mentioned drivers like Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick already. But the first driver I'm going to name here has made his presence very well known in this section over the last few weeks in the playoffs. It's going to be Austin Dillon. Austin Dillon, once again, has placed top 10 in both next-gen starts at Homestead. That includes a career best finish of 4th back in 2022. And you look at his career from a whole at this 1.5-mile track. He has a lowest finish of 25th all the way back in his debut at this track back in 2014. So since then, the 9 starts since, he has finished top 15 in all 9 starts with 4 top 10s and an 11.4 average finish. So what this tells me, once again, is that Austin Dillon has a very high floor for someone who's been very streaky throughout his entire career. And this has been one of his best tracks in his career in the Cup Series. So you can actually bet Austin Dillon with confidence for those top 10 finisher props, entering in your contest for daily fantasy for GridRival. He's going to be an excellent play, a very underrated play as well for this weekend. But I think the biggest money pick that you're going to have for a value in this week is going to be AJ Allmendinger, someone who we typically think about as a road course ace. So to have his name mentioned in this section, your ears should definitely perk up for Homestead. He has statistically been the best driver in the next gen at Homestead because, as mentioned, it's only him and Austin Dillon with top 10s in both next gen starts here. However, he has had 2 top 5 finishes in this next gen starts at Homestead. That is a 5th place finish last year and a career best 3rd place finish back in 2022. And now you also take into account his speed he's had in the Cup Series as a whole this year. Also thinking back to his 6th place finish in his last Cup start at the Roval. I think you can definitely bet him with confidence because he, too, is feeling confident, being the only driver racing for a championship currently in the Xfinity Series. He locked himself into the championship 4 with his win at Las Vegas this past weekend. So I think the confidence is sky high for AJ Allmendinger. He should be a lineup lock by far and away for daily fantasy, and he should be considered for most all props from a betting sense, whether you're thinking top 5s or top 10s. He is an excellent pick for this weekend.
I love both those picks. I mean, that is a trend that I don't think I would have ever guessed. I mean, like you said, you said everything that needed to be said. You think of AJ Allmendinger, you don't necessarily think of Homestead, but now, I mean, that is certainly on my radar because those numbers are way too good to ignore. 2 top 5s, 2 starts, doesn't really get much better than that, and the confidence riding high. Good numbers for both of them at Homestead. I'm going to keep this pretty short and sweet for my value picks because I'm not going to touch really the Homestead numbers. I'm going to touch the recent numbers for my first value, which is Zane Smith. He has been one of our top value picks consistently all year, And it's his first Cup start at Homestead, but guess what? This entire season, it was his first Cup start at a lot of tracks, and it hasn't mattered. He has finished 7 straight races 21st or better, which is really good considering what his value is going to be at, coming off a 16th place finish at Vegas, and he has had 12 consecutive races, finishing 23rd or better. So you're talking about a very high floor for Zane Smith, another one of those guys that is just not that much for risk to put in your lineup, and you never know when he could luck into a top 5 or a top 15 necessarily. And you look at his career at Homestead, he did have a Truck Series finish of second here. So it's not all just the Homestead numbers like you had with Austin Dillon and AJ Allmendinger. I just like where Zane Smith and that team have been at all year, but especially the high floor we've seen out of them recently. Another guy in that same vein that I just like where they're at right now is Corey LaJoie. And we mentioned this a few weeks ago in the sense that with the driver swap between he and Justin Haley, with Corey LaJoie moving over to Rick Ware Racing, weren't really sure what to expect. But now that we've seen 4 races of this, we have an idea because he has had top 15s in 2 out of 4 starts since moving over to Rick Ware, and they've both been at mile-and-a-half tracks after he finished 14th last week. Prior to that, finished 15th at Kansas. So showing some really good promise early on with Corey LaJoie in this equipment, and even Justin Haley in the former seat at Spire Motorsports. I like where those 2 drivers are at this point in the season. I think they want to continue the strong run on a high note, and I think they're very solid value picks here. Getting this field of 12 drivers down to 6, Cole, let's talk about our favorite value, our favorite sleeper, and our favorite of the week.
Awesome. I'm going to kick things off. My favorite is for sure going to be Tyler Reddick, ripping that high line. I think he's going to be a legitimate threat for that win. For my sleepers, I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney. I think being the reigning champion, you got to have a chip on your shoulder. He has the recency and the higher success rate over Chase Elliott from the drivers that I picked. And while I do think that Chase Elliott should have a nice top 5 day, I think that Ryan Blaney has a better chance to do so given his status right now and his current run in the playoffs. For my value pick, I have to go with AJ Allmendinger. 2 top 5s and 2 next-gen starts at Homestead. That is all you need to know.
I'll keep this pretty simple, too. I'll go with Kyle Larson as my favorite. I'll take Martin Truex Jr. from the sleepers, and I'll go with Corey LaJoie as my value pick this week. Let's now discuss big money bets, Cole. These are our favorite prop bets of the week. We've had some really good success hitting the prop bets recently. These are usually top 5s, top 10s, manufacturers, things of that sort. What do you got this week for prop bets?
Prop bets. So I like this weekend William Byron to finish top 5 at even at plus 100. That was another prop that actually hit last week, I think for the 2nd or 3rd consecutive week actually on our end. Same exact value as well at even plus 100. For someone who has finished top 5 the last 4 weeks, seems like a no-brainer to me, especially given his stats at Homestead. I also, in case you couldn't tell from my 3 drivers I narrowed it down to with the favorite sleeper and value pick, I really do like Ryan Blaney this weekend for a top 5 at plus 130. For someone who needs to have a good points day and a really good finish as the reigning champion, I think he has a great shot to do so and finish top 5 this weekend, coming off a runner-up finish in this race last year. Another great big money bet I'm eyeing here is AJ Allmendinger, top 10 at plus 190. Once again, it's only he and Austin Dillon with top 10s in both next-gen starts. He has finished top 5 in both those starts, so his value of plus 190 is almost a no-brainer, and that is the very definition of a big money bet, because while it may be tougher to nail a top 5 prop for Byron or Blaney, a top 10 prop, even for someone like Allmendinger who races on a part-time basis, that's a really, really good number to have right there at plus 190. And then finally, this one's not so much a big money bet, but you could even throw a little money on this and still come out with a good payday. I like Austin Dillon for a top 10 at plus 400. And the reason why I say it's not really a big money bet is because even if you throw $5 on that, you can get 25 back. So you're still getting enough to play around with for next week or whatever. Just not as much confidence from me in picking him for a top 10 over Allmendinger, but definitely one that you can consider some money on at plus 400. That is just insane.
Yeah, and that same note, I would also sprinkle on AJ Allmendinger for a top 5. I mean, he's done it in 2 starts here. I don't know that you can necessarily bank on it to happen again, so I wouldn't call it a big money bet, but plus 700 for a top 5, why not sprinkle on that? As that's not necessarily a big money bet, I would definitely double down on your picks of William Byron for a top 5 and AJ Allmendinger for a top 10 and give those my stamp of approval. The only other one I'd add is Christopher Bell for a top 5. I mean, minus 115 is a really not a bad payout. I mean, if you talk about putting $50 on a bet like that, you're going to get 93, which means you're winning $43 if you put down 50. And listen, he's been automatic top 5s, and I don't see any reason to think any differently. So that's why these are big money bets, because you can feel pretty confidently about putting big money on them. And so I like the ones you had. That's pretty much all I would add to it. Let's also take a look at some different kinds of prop bets from our friends at GridRival, which is a daily fantasy sports app. And I want to remind you, by the way, if you can sign up using the code Kickin, Kickin, you can get up to a $100 match when you make your first deposit. So definitely take advantage of that. And what makes this so fun, Cole, we talk about it a lot since the partnership with GridRival began. You can parlay all kinds of different bets together, including the ones we're about to talk about, which are the better or worse bets. This is basically their version of over or under. So you pick a finishing position for a driver, say if it's going to be better or worse than, say, 5.5. So without further ado, give me your favorite better or worse picks this week.
All right, yeah, so over-under predictions, there's two that I'm a huge fan of. The first one's going to be Austin Dillon, over 17.5. So if Austin Dillon finishes 17th or better, that hits. And again, the way I go about picking out these predictions is looking at the positional finisher values and going from there. So for someone like Austin Dillon, who's finished top 10 in both his next-gen starts, to get a top 17 finish, it seems like a no-brainer to me, even given his inconsistencies and such throughout the season. But I like that one a lot. I like the Ryan Blaney over 7.5 quite a bit as well. Again, this is a driver that I feel is going to contend for a top 5 finish, and having a basically 2-position buffer for a top 7 finish, it gives me a lot of confidence with that prediction as well. William Byron over 6.5. So for someone who's finished top 4 over the last 4 weeks, that seems like a no-brainer. And then I also am a pretty big fan of the Tyler Reddick over 5.5. So to finish inside the top 5, Tyler Reddick. I like this one a lot because he's finished top 3 in 3 of 4 Homestead starts. And he also needs to have pretty much a race winning or a top 3 day in order to have any shot to make the championship 4, because going into my Martinsville next week, that's not a track that really caters to him or the Toyota's skill sets in the next gen. So I'm thinking this 45 team is thinking this is a must-win. So if he does not win this race, he will finish inside the top 5 for sure.
I love those picks, and as I alluded to before, you can also parlay those with head-to-head driver matchups. And what I love about these options on GridRival is that they basically give each driver a spread. So it's Tyler Reddick plus 2.5 positions to finish within Kyle Larson. So he has a buffer of 2, where, as you know, if you go on DraftKings or BetMGM somewhere else, a traditional sports book, it's going to be a straight-up head-to-head driver matchup. So some cool odds and cool values on GridRival in terms of these. Give me your favorite ones this week.
Yeah, so I've got 3 driver matchups here that I'm a big fan of, and what's cool about these ones that I've picked out is that all the drivers I've picked over the other driver, they're actually not favored. So there's a positional buffer of 2.5, so 3 spots for all 3 matchups. The first one is going to be Austin Dillon over Chase Briscoe. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the back-to-back top 10s in the next gen for Austin Dillon, that is something I'm taking stock into. And considering the fact that he has a 12th place average basically in his career at this track, it's been one of his best in what's been a very tough, go at it for him in the Cup Series. So I like that one quite a bit, even given that this is, there's better equipment on the Stewart Haas Racing side. But Austin Dillon over Chase Briscoe. I also like Chase Elliott over Denny Hamlin. And this is a weird one because obviously there's so much talk around Denny Hamlin every single year in the postseason. He's always considered one of the championship favorites. Obviously, we know that Chase Elliott hasn't been as flashy this year, but he's been very consistent. But I don't know. What I've seen from Denny Hamlin this postseason is that they've been just barely good enough, and that's not going to be enough to make this championship 4. And I feel like for someone like Chase Elliott, who's a former champion, who's been in this position before back in 2020 when he went on to win it all, he knows what he has to do. I think he has better stats as a whole at Homestead over Denny Hamlin. And just given what I've seen from the eye test from this 11 bunch, I just don't have a whole lot of confidence that they're going to be able to go out there and do much better than Chase Elliott. And so for that, even if he does get a better finishing position than Chase, I think having that 3-spot buffer for Elliott is a risk I'm willing to take between those two drivers. And then finally, this one's going to be a weird one. So it's a very tough matchup to decide one over the other, but it's Tyler Reddick versus Kyle Larson. I chose Reddick over Larson for the fact that he has a 3-position buffer over the 5 car. I think I have mentioned it numerous times. I really, really do believe that one of these two drivers will win this race, and I think that he is going to at least finish within 3 spots of him. So whether it's Larson getting the win and Reddick finishing third, or Reddick winning the race outright, I think that's another great one to consider just for the sole fact that there is a 3-position buffer between these two heavyweights going into Homestead.
Yeah, those are great picks. I mean, you talk about one of the guys from our sleepers, one of the guys, or two technically, from our favorites, and then also one from our values. I think that's a very solid and well-rounded head-to-head parlays section there. As we mentioned before, Cole, you mentioned it, the fact that we're no longer allowed to look at the prices on daily fantasy for GridRival, being as we're in states that have not been approved yet to enter these kind of contests. So as we're unable to give a lineup recommendation this week, I think it's still worthwhile to give some lineup advice, because there may be even people who are making lineups on DraftKings. But generally, again, I think it's always important to point out you want to look at the starting position. So that's something we say even when we do have a lineup recommendation. You want to see where everybody's going to start. And, we've given you a lot of names here, a lot thrown at you. What would you maybe add as far as putting lineup advice together for this week at Homestead?
Well, I mentioned it at the top of our value picks section. The hallmark of any good episode in terms of success rate and DFS construction is a strong value picks category. And I think we have that right here with these 4 drivers: Austin Dillon, AJ Allmendinger, Zane Smith, and Corey LaJoie. So for me personally, I would feel confident putting any of these 4 drivers into my lineup. I would pick 2 of them and then build up from there. So for me, it would probably be Austin Dillon and Allmendinger. I mean, if you want to maybe don't feel as good about Austin Dillon given the equipment and the season as a whole, I would go Allmendinger and Zane Smith, but build up from there. You've got some sleepers here that are going to probably be very good values in like Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski. I even think the 2 playoff drivers in Ryan Blaney and Chase Elliott should be moderately priced. So from there, when you consider your aces for the weekend, it's going to be very, very tough, if I had to guess, to include Kyle Larson or Christopher Bell. I would probably pick between William Byron and Tyler Reddick, just because those are 2 drivers who I feel like are basically like the 1B to your Kyle Larson, to your Christopher Bell, and you're not going to be sacrificing too much with their values. So, like you said, pay close attention to how practice and qualifying play out, especially qualifying, considering the place differential points. But I think the rule of thumb here is to build from the bottom up. Start with your base in your value picks. There's, again, 4 really good ones here, and go from there.
Yeah, based on where Vegas is valuing those drivers that we mentioned that are great values, like AJ and Austin Dillon, I think starting from there, you're going to have a lot of potential options on how to fill your lineup. And I like the idea of rounding it out with those guys that, like you said, have a really good outside chance at the win to go along with a Tyler Reddick or a Kyle Larson type caliber of driver. So that'll round out our daily fantasy analysis for this week. And Cole, as we put our money where our mouth is and take this thing to the bank, let's talk race winner and sleeper picks, as we do at the end of every episode. You picked Kyle Larson last week. I picked William Byron last week. And this week, as I pick first, I'm going to take Kyle Larson. And here's why. I mean, we've already given you all the reasons as to why, but listen, we've talked a lot about, where each of these drivers are in the standings, but I don't recall seeing a time in the most, the recent couple of years where the gap from the top 4 drivers to the next 4 drivers is this wide. I really feel, when I look at Seabell, Kyle Larson, William Byron, it is hard for me to envision a championship 4 that doesn't include those 3 drivers. And again, there's going to be one of those guys in the bottom 8 that from 5 to 8 that does win their way in, like Ryan Blaney did last year. But I'm banking on the fact that you're going to see one of those guys that doesn't have to win this week. And I think Kyle Larson, in spite of the fact that he's 34 35 points above the bubble. I think he's going to win, whether it's this week or next week, but I think it's going to be this week. I'm taking Kyle Larson to win this week at Homestead.
Excellent pick. So I'll kick things off with my sleeper for the win. Again, that is 15th or lower in the race-winning odds. So that is Chris Buescher and lower per BetMGM. I'll go with Allmendinger here as the obvious answer. There's not a whole lot else to say. I beat the dead horse there in saying that he finished top 5 in both his next-gen starts at Homestead. He's also had a lot of speed in his limited starts this season, including his 6th-place finish in his last start at the Roval. So for that, and of course factoring in the confidence that after winning at Vegas and clinching his way into the Championship 4 for the Xfinity Series, I think he's going to be a great sleeper for the win and a great value all around for this weekend. For my winner pick, I'm going to go with the 1B to your 1A in Tyler Reddick. Once again, honestly, if you had left Kyle Larson on the floor and did not pick Tyler Reddick, I probably would have went with Tyler Reddick, just for the sole reasoning that, like I mentioned during the head-to-head analysis, I think that this is a must-win race for this team. I don't think that Martinsville is a great track for that 45 bunch and the Toyota stable as a whole in the next gen. So with that in mind, they're going to have to get the win. They're going to have to at least get a top 3 finish if they want any shot of making the Championship 4 on points. But I really do believe it's going to be between these two drivers. I think it's going to be an absolute dogfight back and forth between the two of them. And, the stat line that he has here in his Cup career is definitely remarkable. 3 top 3 finishes in 4 starts. He's got the pair of Xfinity Series wins. I love Reddick this weekend for Homestead.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, it was interchangeable. Whichever one I didn't pick, you were going to take, and that sorts itself out. I'm going to take Austin Dillon as my sleeper this week. I mean, you said all the reasons that there were. There's just too much success at Homestead to ignore for him and Tyler Reddick. So got Austin Dillon as my sleeper, and I got Kyle Larson as my winner. But it's going to be a fun one. Cole Homestead, one of obviously the most illustrious tracks in the sport. We used to crown a champion here every year, and now ever since the championship moved to Phoenix, which I know both you and I love because that's our home track, this has been a track that, the whole allure of it used to be that a champion was crowned here. But now the allure of it, especially in the next-gen era, has just been that the racing is fantastic, and there's something to be said for that. It's a great big market that NASCAR is growing and really bursting in popularity in, and there's just so much fantastic history. I love this week when I see all the accounts posting about great moments that have happened at Homestead through the years. Listen, it's the same prior to Homestead. It was Atlanta. There's just great history built into the sport, but especially at this track where, like you said, it's one of the best 1.5 mile tracks in the sport right now. So we're excited, and we're also excited to help put some money in your pocket. At that being said, it's the Straight Talk Wireless 400, 2:35 Eastern Time, this upcoming Sunday at Homestead-Miami Speedway. For all of us here at the Money Stop, that includes Kickin the Tires, GridRival, Cole Cusumano, I'm Steven Cusumano. Thanks so much, as always, for tuning in. Give us a like, subscribe, all those great things, reviews. Let us know what you think on Apple, Spotify, anywhere that you may be listening. And please follow at @the_MoneyStop on social media. We're always talking, late-breaking storylines, developments to the things that we've spoken about here. And obviously, we love talking about paint schemes and the sport in general as well. So at @the_MoneyStop, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, X, wherever you may be on social media, we're there too. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week at Martinsville.